Hello, welcome to Equity and Inclusion Begin with Teacher Preparation, presented by Dr. Audri Gomez and Dr. Meghan Cosier. My name is Juliet Nyanwu, SIP Program Specialist, and your moderator for this incredibly informative breakout session. But first, a few logistics. This webinar will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will access to Spanish translation. We will ensure the ASL interpreters are spotlighted alongside the PowerPoint and also the presenters. Please feel free to interact using the chat and ask specific questions in the Q&A option. And with that said, I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here with us today. As Juliet indicated, our focus on today's session will be equity and inclusion, begin with teacher preparation. So before we get started, again, welcome to our session. We wanted to do a land acknowledgement, acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory and homelands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, which was 350,000 people across California alongside the Los Angeles basin. And in acknowledging the Tongva people, we acknowledge a part of our California history and where we are today. So I am Audri Sandoval Gomez. I am the co-director of the Thompson Policy Institute on Disability at Chapman University. And I'm here with my co-presenter, and I'll pass it along to Dr. Cosier so she can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Meghan Cosier. I'm Director and Associate Professor of the Thompson Policy Institute on Disability here at Chapman University. And we have a co-presenter who is not able to make it today, Charlotte Achieng Evensen. Charlotte is our Senior Transformation Specialist here at the Thompson Policy Institute and leads the California Educator Preparation Innovation Collaborative, which we'll be sharing about today.
So our objectives for the session, again, our focus is on equity and inclusion and how that starts at teacher preparation. As teachers are prepared to go into K through 12 schools, we want to ensure that equity and inclusion are part of that conversation. So as part of the session, we will talk about how we establish authentic relationships as a foundation for building these inclusive spaces, as well as engaging in conversations on how we begin centering disability as a core component of the systems change work. So just to give a little background, nothing that you probably already don't know, but I think it's important that we address them as our foundation and where we are at today. As you can see on your screen, this represents a number of pressing issues related to teacher education and teacher preparation. This includes teacher shortages, particularly in the areas of special education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Outcomes for students with disabilities still remain a pressing issue as well, and so does the educator diversity gap. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment, but these challenges and obviously our impact of COVID-19, how can I forget that? Obviously all of these, and there's others, right, that do impact current challenges, not only in teacher preparation, but that trickles down to K-12 education. And these challenges impact how we're focusing and preparing our teachers to focus on equity and inclusion. So here's some data for you. We know that teacher preparation and new teachers support leads leads teachers staying in the field. The preparation, not only the preparation, but the ongoing support through induction and mentoring and coaching is critical for teacher retention. And so it's, as you can see on your screen, teacher shortages are still an apparent and current challenge in our educational system. So not only does teacher preparation need to continue when teachers are in service in schools, but we need to ensure that what we're doing at the start and preparing our teachers is building their capacity as much as we can with that equity and inclusion lens, so that when they get into the schools, they're well prepared, well equipped to support all learners. And as I mentioned, I would talk a little bit about the educator diversity gap that we are seeing. Probably to no surprise from all of you here, we continue to see that there is a pretty vast difference between the students that we are educating in our schools today and how that and with our teachers. And so this table here on your screen shows that gap between the ethnic makeup of our students and those going into the teaching profession. And so what I would also like to add to this, which is not part of this table, is not only is race, there's a diversity gap too, but also those who do have disabilities going into the profession. We also see that as a gap as well. So I do want to acknowledge that those who identify as having a disability going into the profession, there still remains a large gap in that particular area. So what we know is if we are preparing our teachers to support all students, we know that they will stay in the classroom much longer. They will be much more successful in supporting all students. It addresses issues of equity and inclusion. It improves student success and ensures the health and wellness for all of our students and teachers. This cannot be just part of our normal pedagogy. We need to ensure that our teachers going into the field are well equipped to not only support all students, but they need to be able to do that, whether that's academics, social, emotional, and behavior. And so when we look at the educational system through teacher preparation, we still see it very much siloed, where we have general education and special education. And to some degree, what we're doing, where there's some great innovative approaches that some teacher preparation programs are doing, whether they are combining those credentials, and so teachers are better prepared to serve all students. But there still remains significant siloed approaches. And so what we know is that if we can bring those programs together, we can ensure that our teacher candidates are much well versed to serve and support all students. So I'm going to introduce what we've been doing at the Thompson Autism Center here at Chapman University. We were awarded a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it is the focus is on ensuring that equity and inclusion are part of our normal teacher preparation, not only just discussion, but changing praxis and changing protocols and curriculum and supports to ensure that our teachers are well versed to support all students. And we're doing that through what we call as CalEPIC, and that stands for California Educator Preparation Innovation Collaborative. CalEPIC serves independent non-for-profit universities where we look at innovative approaches to support all students and desegregating those siloed approaches. So here is our vision and our mission for CalEPIC. As you can see, our focus is ensuring that we're building the capacity of California's diverse, well-prepared, and thriving educators to support equity, inclusivity, and the whole child in schools today. Again, that goes to that educator gap, educator diversity gap. So we want to ensure that we're producing well-equipped teachers to be able to support all students. What we do at CalEPIC is in partnership with educator preparation programs across the state. We support their teacher preparation programs to develop and deliver some innovative approaches and supports for their educator preparation programs that are focused specifically on equity and diversity, so that when they are changing their programming, changing their curriculum, they have in mind that of supporting all students across both general education and special education, so that it becomes one system. So I think I'm going to pass it along to, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep going. So what we do is within collaborative partnerships, like I just indicated, right now we're working with 5 institutions across California and their teacher education programs to transform educator preparation by centering equity and inclusion. And we're really excited to show you some of that work in hopes that you'll be able to build upon it and take it and use it to establish relationships between programming, so that all teachers are supporting all students. And this is our why. Of course, like I just said, we want to ensure that we're centering equity and inclusion. And our why is because we need to diversify the teacher pipeline. Going back to the first couple of slides, we showed how the gap. And so we want to ensure that we are addressing that gap. And so that the students we are providing an education to, we're producing teachers who are also diverse. And so that they most closely represent that TK-12 community wherever those teachers are going into. Ensuring that we are increasing access to quality teaching for all students. Again, desegregating those silos that we most commonly see. And of course, we see that as teachers are getting prepared, and that perpetuates the system in K through 12. We want to promote conversations, healthy conversations around disability as part of diversity, equity, inclusion. So often disability is not part of that conversation, and it needs to be. And so I think for us, it's really ensuring that we're centering not just disability, but looking at those intersections of various components, whether that's race, sex, gender, ability. And so we're looking at that from a more holistic view and ensuring that where it's not, disability is not forgotten, it is part of that conversation when we're talking about DEI. Our why is creating systems where local education agencies and institutes for higher education, those partners can come together to ensure that we are supporting sustainable practices across the board as teachers are being prepared in higher education, and then moving on to becoming a teacher in service, that they're continuing to get that or building the capacity so they can remain in the field and have quality teaching, and ensuring that they are able to support all students. And lastly, developing strategies and systems that help teachers and all students thrive. So through CalEPIC, these are our intended outcomes. And again, like I said, we've been working with with 5 institutions across California right now. And what we're focusing on is bringing teacher education programs together, where we are ensuring equitable access and opportunity for all students. And sometimes it's having those hard conversations, and not only having those conversations, but acting on them. What are we going to do next to ensure that we are ensuring that all students have equitable access and opportunity? Ensuring that our teachers are well equipped to be able to support all students. Ensuring that our practices are innovative and are based on improved outcomes. And we're establishing meaningful relationships between institutes of higher education and TK-12 partnerships. Now, we do this through a variety of things. And as you can see on the right side of your screen, through deep collaboration to ensure that we're able to make impact. We look at data in an equitable manner to ensure whether that's quantitative and qualitative. We look at the coursework that teacher preparation programs are providing, and to determine whether is disability part of that conversation, what needs to happen to ensure that students with disabilities are being addressed within the curriculum in teacher preparation. And if not, we need to ensure that how we are addressing students of all abilities is part of the conversation in the coursework in teacher preparation. Ensuring that our clinical experiences are opportunities where students are our student teachers are thriving, and that they are also, again, it's a moment where we can build their capacity to work with all students. And then lastly, culturally responsive and inclusive instruction is a key component for one of our intended outcomes. So now I'd like to pass it on to my co-presenter, Dr. Meghan Cosier, who will be talking about our framework at a glance and what you see on the screen here.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for providing that background and providing the overview of the Cal EPIC work. As Audrey mentioned, the big ideas of Cal EPIC are to work in collaborative partnership with educator preparation programs to center disability, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that we do, and to come together to have some of those discussions about what we need to do collectively and what people are doing already to make sure that we're preparing all teachers to work with all students. So I'm going to get into a little bit more of the details about the Cal EPIC framework and how we work with educator preparation programs. Sometimes we'll refer to it as an EPP or a teacher preparation program in partnership with local educational agencies who serve pre-K through 12 and also and beyond. So this is our overarching framework in that we work in collaboration with educator preparation programs to have discussions and do some investigation of our own programs in these particular areas. You can see the further down, there's a highlight of something that we've been working on in particular lately. And I'll give some examples in just a second that we'll be able to dig into that provide a good idea of what these actionable items that ed prep programs are talking about and discussing. First is equity-centered program design. And you'll see that as we come through and discuss our self-evaluation tool. And it allows for programs to look at what are we currently doing, and then what are the areas we really want to look at to improve or innovate that where we could really say our program is equity-centered. And then it moves through, again, these three big goals around equitable access, innovative practices, meaningful TK-12 partnerships, and thriving students and teachers. And then we have the commitments to each of those collected here. And then it moves through teacher candidate performance assessments. Are those culturally and linguistically responsive? So for example, oftentimes in teacher preparation programs, we make sure that our teacher candidates, or sometimes also referred to as our pre-service teachers, or those that are going in programs for teacher licensure, that they are often using culturally and linguistically responsive assessments with their own students in their classrooms. This allows us to look at our own educator preparation programs and our own assessments and do some discussion and planning and improvement and innovation around are we using culturally and linguistically responsive assessments in our own programs? Again, using data for continuous improvement. We have scaling and sustainability. So how are we ensuring that anything that we're doing, it can be brought to scale and can be sustained over time? This might be, for example, something like a teacher residency model that we start perhaps with a pilot and an innovation, but how can we be thinking about how to bring that model to all of the candidates across our programs? As opposed to having a select set of candidates, for example, have access to it. Again, how do we make sure we're thinking about in our programs, attracting, recruiting, supporting, and retaining diverse teacher candidates, using data for continuous improvement? Then it moves to these partnership pieces. We've been spending a lot of time this year working on those partnership pieces. How do we make sure that we all collectively understand what we all mean by reciprocal university school partnerships, and then how do we enact those partnerships to the benefit of not only our teacher educators, but to the students in the K-12 or pre-K-12 schools. How do we make sure that we have highly effective cooperating teachers and mentor teachers? And then lastly, focusing on clinical experiences and practice-based coursework. So the big idea of the framework is to have a set of commitments that allow us to frame our conversations around improvement and innovation in our educator preparation programs that focus on equity and inclusion. Now I'm going to move to a lot of components, but so how does this actually work in practice? And I'm going to move to some examples of contextualizing what would an educator preparation program do should they decide, yes, we'd really love to focus on these things, what might happen next? So I'm going to move to providing some examples of what that would look like for an educator preparation program. Again, big idea. A lot of these discussions that we work on in collaboration with our educator preparation programs focus specifically on inclusion, access, and disability. You'll see the tools that we've developed mention MTSS, or multi-tiered system of support. They mention universal design for learning. They mention social emotional learning. So in oftentimes these will allow really deep and robust conversations about these multi-tiered system of support, universal design for learning, and social emotional learning. It also creates a structure where we have whole program approaches, and we're simply not siloing a discussion, for example, in a general education teacher preparation program or a special education or ed specialist teacher preparation program, but we're taking a whole program inclusive approach in a way that centers students with disabilities as general education students first and foremost. The tool that I'm going to provide an example of is a demonstration of how our framework is, how we put that into action. So we saw kind of the big ideas in the framework. So we developed what's called a self-evaluation tool. This tool is meant to, first and foremost, encourage discussion around different issues of equity and inclusion across the different commitments or component areas with a whole educator preparation program team and their district, school, local educational agency partners. They review and complete the self-evaluation tool. They identify areas for improvement, they develop action items, and then they implement and monitor. So this might look very familiar to you when I show you, because it does follow an evidence-based approach we often use or use in California. Does this maybe look familiar to anybody if I show this to you, if anybody's used you can share in the chat if this might look familiar to you. If you have used the fidelity integrity assessment with the MTSS, then yes, Kristen and the FIA. So we had been involved in MTSS, and as we started to work on CalEpic, that is such a great tool that really centers robust conversation, right? Not compliance-based, but really centers robust conversation around systems approaches to change and systems approaches to equity and inclusion. And so this follows a similar format to the FIA in that, of course, the components are different, but the look and feel is the same, in that it's intended to be a user-friendly document that will lead to some action planning, but first leads to some discussions around these particular issues. So up on the screen right here, you'll see that there's an indicator. Now, we have quite a few outcomes and indicators. Happy to share those at another time. We just pulled a select number of indicators for example today. This is a particular one that deals with quality, program quality. We have indicators that deal with quality, impact, scale, and sustainability. So we're going to dig into the quality indicators today. So for here, we have this indicator that does our program prepare candidates to really address student differences, and does our program include high leverage or evidence-based practices? Here we have what the components are, and this is really where the good discussion begins. So do our syllabi contain a focus on anti-racist and asset-based teaching? Do they include evidence-based practices for English language learners and students with disabilities? So our program as a whole, our educator preparation program, might have a discussion around how do we think we're doing in this area? What other areas are we not covering? An example I might give for the second one is, are our key assignments, or those big assignments that we use to track student progress over time, do they include universal design for learning? How are we doing with that? Do we need to include more on that? So the big idea is to not say, oh, we're not doing this right, or we are doing this right, but rather to have a conversation around how are we doing in these particular areas? How are we doing with our clinical experiences? Are they robust as we would like them to be? So the program comes together and has some discussions around these particular areas. Then we identify some areas. Where do we think we are? And again, you'll notice that this is similar to the FIA. And where do we think we are? Are we doing most of this? Do we have everything throughout our program? Or could we focus more on making sure that, for example, we are including collaboration and co-teaching throughout our curriculum? The program would then decide to choose some goals. What would they like to focus on? What do we think we really want to improve? And use this as a guide to decide where they want to start focusing. I'm going to show the next one, and then we're going to do some reflection in the webinar about how this might apply to the educator preparation programs or teacher preparation programs that you work with. Okay. Now I'm going to explain some of the acronyms too, because some of them are teacher education specific here. Well, let me go to the first one. We can stay there. So let's go, we'll stay with the first one as a reflection. In thinking about an educator preparation program that you might be involved with, that you might work with, if you were to look through the set and reflect on your own teacher preparation program, what are some areas that you think your team might want to dig into to really assess how are we doing in this area? What might stand out to you? For example, it might be, do our clinical experiences involve opportunities for all teachers to work with students with extensive support needs? So I'll just have some time to kind of take a look at this and think through in your own educator preparation programs, what kinds of things do you think your team might discuss? And whenever you're ready, you can post in the chat, but I'll leave this up here just for a few minutes and go on mute just to think about how you might apply something like this, or what kind of reflection might you see in here that your team could discuss. Okay, and I'd love to know, I see some people posting in the chat. Please feel free to post in the chat. What stands out to you as something that your teams or a team that you might work with might start discussing? I see Kristen says that diverse placements where, yes, finding placement. So we might start having a conversation around where students with extensive support needs, where can our teacher candidates go to see placements where students with extensive support needs are taught in inclusive settings? What might we do as a program to figure out how do we find those places where they can see really quality inclusive education and build those relationships? That would be a great example of how a tool like this might start some conversation around what we might do to do that. Yeah, so it could be using to support the coaching of teachers on campus. It does help. Where do we need to make changes? What opportunities are we providing? What's in our curriculum? Yes, and that clinical experiences with children or students with extensive support needs is having some conversation around that, and what can we do to make sure that we provide, again, all teachers with that opportunity to have those experiences. And yes, Barbara mentions the training and conversation for models for general education and special education, a dual credential model. We have had some of the, or a dual licensure model, some would refer to it as, or even sharing of curriculum. So that common trunk of shared curriculum across general education and special education. We have found that this has been a tool that has been helpful in starting to bring conversations from programs together, who either some already have programs, but also it has been a tool for programs that might often not work together. So some educator preparation programs in the state, for example, the general education licensure and special education licensure are in completely different departments. And how do we bring those departments and those stakeholders together to have some robust conversations around what's in the curriculum that all of our teacher candidates get, so we make sure that all of our teacher candidates are well prepared to teach all teachers. Please feel free to continue to add in the chat. I am going to, oh yes, yeah, so modeling for educators, parents, paraprofessionals, and administrators. One of the things that is not in this particular piece that we do have is around education and educator professional learning. And that goes exactly to, I think, what this comment speaks to in terms of the extensive training and modeling. And that part of what we have in here is, once we have identified particular areas that we want to make sure around inclusive practices, for example, how do we make sure that we're providing the professional learning opportunities for perhaps even educator preparation program faculty, for example, so, or the teacher education faculty, that practice might be new to them. How do we make sure that we embed that in our educator preparation program and how we do business and how we operate, so we make sure that those systems are in place? I'm going to provide just a couple more examples of components of the self-evaluation tool. Again, just to provide a big idea, please feel free to contact us directly if you're interested in the entire tool itself and taking a look at the entire framework and all the outcomes and indicators beyond this. These examples right here, please feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to provide you with that. So here we have, do we have high quality pre-K through 12 curricula within coursework and clinical experiences? And you'll see here, this might be a topic of conversation that we may dig into as an educator preparation program as we're looking through the self-evaluation tool. Does our coursework incorporate high quality curricula that includes anti-racist teaching practices and around topics of making the curricula accessible to students with disabilities, even the most significant support needs? So I might give an example of particularly with the students with disabilities and most significant support needs, a conversation that came up through the use of the set with an educator preparation program. And that conversation was centered around what are we doing in our literacy course? Oftentimes we provide at minimum one foundational literacy course for many of our teacher candidates. But what was discussed there is how might we ensure that there is some focus on curricula and accessibility for students with extensive support needs? What would that look like? How would we need to collaborate to make sure that might be embedded in our foundational literacy course, so all teachers have access to those tools and strategies that make that curriculum and make reading instruction accessible for all students. So that would be an example of a conversation that came out of some discussion around the self-evaluation tool. A TPE is a teaching performance expectation. This is particular to Educator Preparation Program in the state. It's the standards that are required. And just I guess in all areas, we like to use a lot of acronyms, don't we? Again, this is another example of where, as a program, we would come together and have some conversations and then identify some action items to move forward. Here's one more example, also related to clinical practice and coursework. And this is digging into the educator preparation program, discussing, do our candidates have opportunities to learn core content? And do they have opportunities to implement practices around anti-racist teaching practices, making the curricula responsive and accessible to students of color and students with disabilities, even those with the most extensive support needs? So again, this would allow us to look through our syllabi and what opportunities students are having, or teacher candidates are having in their clinical placements that allow them access to learn about these best practices and access to implementing these best practices. This is a little bit busy, but this is an example of a planning tool that we use with our educator preparation programs. It has the indicator, a description, where the program strengths are, where do we see us as being strong as a program, what do we think we need to work on, and then what support we might need to get there. So we take those big discussions and then we move to an action planning template where we think, okay, we're installing, which is again is similar to the FIA. We kind of do a big idea that with that multi-tiered system of support, we get a big idea of where we are as a program, and then we turn that into an action plan. What do we want to address that is going to help us move toward equitable program design, access and opportunity for all of our teachers to learn about and apply high leverage practices for all students, including students with disabilities. So here is, again, we have a 3-year process. This is a snapshot of what this 3-year process might look like. And in identifying professional learning opportunities with our local educational agencies and setting goals for year 1, year 2, and year 3, so we can take those big ideas. What do we really want to do? Whether it be, as mentioned in the comments, creating a structure where candidates can obtain a dual licensure, or even creating a structure where we have some where it may not be a dual licensure, but we want to make sure that our ed specialists and our general education candidates have opportunity to co-teach with each other in their placements. So we want placements where our candidates can, across their credential areas, can collaborate. And this would be an example of how we plan through our 3-year process to make that systems change that can last over time and can sustain. We were going to have some time to use the self-evaluation tool. I'm not sure that we quite have time for that today. So I wonder if we can engage just in the final 2 prompts right here for the sake of time, and then we can have some question and we can wrap up with some question and answer. Wondering what your thoughts are on how you think this tool might facilitate conversations around current practices in educator preparation. Would love to hear in the chat, just knowing this snapshot of the work of CalEpic and the use of the self-evaluation tool. How might this facilitate conversations around current practices? Thoughts, ideas? Yes, the guided self-reflection is so important. We agree. We see the power. We saw the power of that, of course, with the multi-tiered system of support approach. And we see that it's also powerful when we're focusing on educator preparation programs as well. Yeah, so really reflecting on those biases, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, thank you for sharing. So it is, if it helps with the self-evaluation, and it is really meant for reflection and moving through. So our teams, our educator preparation program teams can really take some time to discuss what are we doing. One, I think about even related to that was a conversation we had around social emotional learning and what we were doing as an educator preparation program to ensure that our teachers were well prepared in areas of social emotional learning. The deep discussion that we were able to have around that, and what the district and us as an educator preparation program would love for the students or teacher candidates or new teachers to know and really be able to do. It allows for such deep understanding and reflection. So that absolutely, what are we doing and why? Absolutely self-identified, and having us really be able to look through what are we doing as a program, what are we acknowledging, you know, that where we have really strong, and then what are those areas we always want to do that continuous improvement. And y'all made that point here, and we make that point often, that it has evaluation in the name, but really it's to it is that self-evaluation piece. So we want to move away from compliance and really move to how can we have those deep discussions that lead to lasting change. Lastly, and many of you have discussed this too, we do want to ensure that those areas of discussion, that those areas that we discuss in the set that are covered in the self-evaluation tool do allow for programs to focus on around equity, access, and inclusion. Yeah, so somebody mentions in the chat that California standards for the teaching profession that our teacher candidates move toward focusing on in their first year's teaching and through induction. It's such, that reflection is so important, and we can model that. I see there are some hands raised, but we are at just about time. Again, this is a snapshot of our action plan. We can certainly feel free to share the slides and any of these tools that y'all would be interested in using that would help think through what might we focus on as a team in terms of clinical experience coursework. Again, that idea of professional learning. What do we all need to learn more about to make sure that our candidates are getting what they need, and sustainability. We'll close with this and also open it up to questions. There is a Q&A option. We can also have questions in the chat. One aha, anything that stuck out to you that emerged from this presentation, and then questions that you might have. I'm using my good teacher wait time, I think. But would love to answer any questions. Audrey and I would love to answer any questions that you might have. Please feel free to put those in the chat or in the Q&A. Yeah, I see comments about, yes, that there's much more covered than one might be assumed, and it might help engage in richer conversations and support. Agreed, yes, and that partnership with the local educational agencies through this work, I think helps address that. Anybody else have questions or comments that we can answer? Well, I guess we can give another minute, and then if there are no additional questions, we can certainly close. We'll give it another minute in case y'all have any questions or comments that we might be able to cover for you. If something does come up and you are interested in our tools as a resource, you can certainly email us. Our email addresses are right here. I'm Meghan Cosier, Cosier@chapman.edu. Our co-director, Audri Sandoval Gomez at agomez@chapman.edu. And our senior transformation specialist, Charlotte Achieng Evensen, is at evensen.edu. Our Cal Epic website is also here for you. So thank you all so much, and really appreciate you attending, and we hope to hear from you.
Thank you, Audri and Meghan, and thank you everyone in attendance. Please be sure to join us for the panel discussion with Beth Forker and her team. Also, you can connect in the social lounge with like-minded attendees and post on social media using the hashtag SIPCon 2022. Please make sure to complete the conference survey at the end of the day. I will drop a link in the chat right now so you have that available to you. But thank you so much for your time, everyone. I'm going to drop the link right now. And thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon. I will see you all at the
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.